Good afternoon and welcome to the European Commission's press room, and thank you also for following us live on Europe by satellite today, 8th of February. The College of Commissioners held its weekly meeting this morning, and Executive Vice President Vestager is here to provide you a readout of that meeting, after which the Executive Vice President will present the main point on the Commission's agenda, together with Commissioners Breton and Gabriel. Executive Vice President, please.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone, and good afternoon. Welcome to the College readout. First, I should make that short because we had this one point on the calendar. The College adopted a package of proposals on the European Chips Act today, and we will explain, I think, in great detail in just a moment. The College also decided to transfer Mrs. Raitis Martikonis, who is currently Director General of DG Translation, to the post of Director General and Chair of the Regulatory Scrutiny Board. He will take up his function on the 1st of March. And that was the points to mention to you on the College. Now, please allow me to continue on the European Chips Act that the College adopted today. It's a strategic initiative, and the point is to help us deliver on our green and digital ambitions. And it's also a central piece to European recovery and to long-term competitiveness. As you will know, in digitalized societies, chips really matters. To put it simply, there is no digital and no green transition without chips. Those tiny electronic circuits that power any digital object around us. Back in the days, of course, chips were part of many world firsts. The first space mission, the first remote surgery, the first clean and automated public transportation. Today, they are in thousands of objects in our daily life: cars, phones, coffee makers. And tomorrow, they will be core to developments of artificial intelligence and cutting-edge computing. So chips are both making our daily lives easier, but they also hold the key to our most pressing challenges. Well, fighting global warming, planning our response to future pandemics. So a lot of promise and a lot of day-to-day convenience. But we face a problem, a serious and global shortage of chips, which has several explanations. A sudden and strong demand for digital devices, accelerated, of course, by the pandemic. A very rigid and concentrated chip market with very high barriers to entry, and geopolitical tensions. And this shortage has social consequences. Factories being forced to shut down, workers being laid off. And it also exposes the weaknesses of our European chip production capacity. With a global semiconductor market share of only 10%, Europe is heavily dependent on just a handful of foreign suppliers. Our manufacturing capabilities, well, they are almost all located in what we call legacy chips. They are larger chips, and we find them in many products already, in cars, in radio communication, just to give you two examples. And these chips will continue to be important. They will also continue to develop. But the thing is that we also need the smaller, cutting-edge chips in order to drive our green and digital transformation. And those we need more and more to lead to innovative products and to solutions. Overall, we expect that Europe's need for chips will double in the next decade. So we have two ambitions. First, to prevent new shortages, to make us less vulnerable in case it happens again. And the European Chips Act is not about solving the current shortage. That would be impossible due to the time it takes to increase capacities. But it's about expanding our current production to secure the future. Second, We want to develop innovative, cutting-edge chips from fundamental research all the way to final market applications, so that it can benefit Europe as a whole and all its businesses, big and small, all sectors included. And we're not starting from scratch. Europe has important strengths to bring to the table. We're very strong in the design of specific semiconductor components, be it for power electronics or for the automotive industry. We are well positioned in the production of materials for chips and also all the equipment needed to produce chips. And we are the world's center for chips research. For example, here in Belgium, in Leuven, a research center called IMEC is driving development of state-of-the-art semiconductor worldwide. Lithuania is a key electronic manufacturing hub in the Baltic region, and that be for telecom, for defense, for medical devices. It's also an important leader when it comes to the lasers needed to make the microchips. Spain is a European global champion when it comes to the design, the development, and the manufacturing of the electronic components for cars' passive keyless entry, with more than 60% of global market share. But with all these strengths, we're still lacking behind when it comes to cutting edge. So 5 things to do to change it. First things first, make our strengths stronger. Secure the leadership that we have when it comes to research. Build next-generation facilities and deliver chips across our industry. Second, bring this research to life. Bridge the gap between the research and manufacturing so that we can have pilot lines, prototyping facilities, testing facilities to close this gap between the laboratory and the production facility. And third, for this to happen, to have the right skills. A workforce of qualified engineers. We need to attract more people to this sector, attract new talent, and of course make sure that they have the skills they need. Fourth, we need to produce more chips, both the legacy chips that I talked about, and of course to develop those, but also to these new cutting-edge and energy-efficient chips. But this is a thing that Europe cannot do alone. And this is why, fourthly, last but not least, we must develop an in-depth understanding of our international role and build our international relationship with like-minded partners. And this has been tried before. So what is new this time? Well, what is new this time is that we have some specific results on ground to build from. We have current and upcoming projects of common European interest. We have existing investment through the Horizon European programme, including through the joint undertaking on key digital technologies, and we have the treaty provisions of state aid to enable first-of-a-kind production facilities. Starting with these IPCIs, important project of common European interest, we already have one. And that first project, well, it brings together companies, research centres and member states. And for every €1 of public support that was invested, private sector has invested 3 more. So that project already is 2 billion of public money, helping 6.5 billion of private investment to materialise in the project that is already producing results. We have a second IPCI in the pipeline, expected to involve over 100 participants from about 20 member states. It will focus on chips innovation in areas such as AI processors, edge computing, electronic mobility. In addition, we will transform our current joint undertaking on key digital technologies into a new chips joint undertaking. And that will enable us both to leverage more investment, but also to invest in the pilot lines, in the design platform, and in the competence centres to enable the workforce to emerge. And this should help everyone, SMEs in particular. But there is one thing, and I will end with that. it deserves a bespoke approach, and that is the funding of first-of-a-kind facilities. They require large investments that private investors cannot fund on their own. It can be as regards the scale of chips, so even smaller than we know them, or other factors such as their environmental footprints, and to provide the open facility so that new designers in Europe can have their new design chips produced. And such facilities, well, they would not exist in Europe if we do not do something. And it is important for long-term European security of supply and competitiveness. And this means that it may be justified to cover up to 100% of a proven funding gap with public resources. This doesn't require new rules or changed rules or bended rules. This requires us to assess the projects directly on the treaty, to check that all conditions are met to avoid any competition distortions. Also, because we want to avoid a subsidy race in Europe and beyond. So it needs to be first of a kind. Second, aid needs to be targeted and proportionate, only what is needed and nothing more. And third, the project will need to benefit Europe as a whole, because this is a European chips strategy. It is for Europe as a whole without discrimination. And as said, Europe cannot solve this alone. That is why we must work with trusted partners to build a diverse, resilient supply chain, to avoid single points of failure, and of course, to help each other on a rainy day. We aim for reciprocal openness in our respective efforts, and we are already discussing chips with US partners within the framework of the Trade and Technology Council, and we will do so with other like-minded partners such as Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. Because one thing is for sure, increasing our production capacities in Europe is not only good for European industry, it also makes us a better partner to others. To conclude, the CHIPS Act is a unique opportunity for many, for SMEs, research organizations, businesses, to come together and benefit Europe as a whole. Because when you think about the scale of what is needed, I think it's obvious that no company and no country can achieve this on their own. I see an unprecedented interest. As you see, we are the three of us here today, and efforts must start now, continue what is growing on ground to make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Breton.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say that without the personal commitment of President Ursula von der Leyen from day one of this file, we wouldn't be here, the three of us standing before you today, to present to you one of the most important industrial acts for many years. One of my colleagues reminded us at the college earlier on that what we're presenting today affects geopolitical issues as well, and we've been talking about that too. Europe cannot stay out of this technology race. On the topic of chips, as we have just been reminded by the Commissioner, chips are so important for the industry, but also for the digital transition and the green transition. We want to work together with our international partners, and international partners are indeed investing massively in this sector at the moment because it's so important for all industries, and I reiterate that, all industries. I think that with the act that we've presented today, we are conveying a clear message. Europe cannot fail to jump on this bandwagon. We need to seize this opportunity rather than let it pass us by. We want to be part of this race, and we're going to continue running this race by investing in research and development. As Margarette just reminded us, we have significant investments that have already been done. Maria is an expert in this topic. We have made significant investments, and we've been able to use these to the advantage of industrial centres and research institutions in Europe, and we will talk about that a little more later on. We have become a centre of excellence in fintech, in FDSOI technology. We're world leaders in certain domains. We have specialisms in very high intensity calculation microchips, and there are other companies that are working on low energy consumption chips, and we need both aspects for the digital transition and the green transition. So it was very important for us to be able to move along these lines. We're supporting the technological transition, and we're setting very clear targets. We are investing in cutting-edge technologies. We are looking at FinFET, but also to make sure that we can have very high-performing microchips and to incorporate all of this into the FDSOI, because we're going to be investing in research areas that all integrate into one another. And it's an opportunity for Europe, because this is no small fry that we're talking about. We have been able to get researchers on board, academic institutions. They are all in agreement that we must work on this and we must go further. And I'm talking about 1.4 nanometers. IMEC is the research centre that is producing the most precise engravings in the world, 1,000th the width of a hair. That's what we can achieve with these semiconductors. So we will keep moving forward. Roberto Viola and his team are here. You know that we're going to be working together with you. And when we get down to below a nanometer, we're going to be looking at quantum mechanics, and we are committed to developing these kinds of chips as well and seeing what their applications can be in the future. I'm going to give the floor to Maria soon, because she is the expert and she can tell you more of the details about this project. But we believe that the research angle is extremely significant, as has been said already. Over 11 billion euros in public money that's going to be invested into research with three main areas, three pilot areas: advanced packaging, FinFET and FDSOI. And all European researchers will be able to have access to this infrastructure, a bit like how we currently use infrastructure for researchers. We have CERN, we have other centres that all researchers can come into and use to test techniques. Just to give you an example, we are also going to have these kinds of infrastructures where researchers can come in and work together from the 27 different member states and also from the universities, because we are very keen on linking youth training to this, and on training young people who are going to work in these domains. I can't emphasise enough the value of the digital domain. We are going to look at how all of this technology can be integrated into semiconductors. This is what we call the packaging. And we need to have a space where health experts can come in, can talk about new applications in the health domain. Telecoms people can come in, cybersecurity, people from the automotive sector, just to mention a few different areas of application. The second point is that, obviously, as the vaccine crisis has shown us, we have expertise in research, but that's not enough. And talking of the vaccine, we put a lot of money, a lot of finances into the vaccines, and we don't say this enough, but we've been successful in this at European level. We've been able to move from the research phase very rapidly to production. It was difficult, it was complex, and this is becoming an increasing subject of discussion. A few years back, we said to each other, the future means companies with no factories. That's what we thought. In the future, there would be no factories anymore. But some people say that in the next stage of industrial development, we might see fragmentation. That's what people are saying now. We might see research working in isolation to factories. But that's not the case. Things are actually integrating more and more. Research and applied research is being integrated increasingly into factories. from lab to fab, as we say in our jargon, having things in proximity, making them part of the same ecosystem. I'm not just talking about having a research institute a few meters away from the factory, but really having them work together to create this added value. That's absolutely vital, so that research can be brought as close as possible to industry, to these high added value industries on the site of production. And that's what's going to help us with our second pillar of the CHIPS Act. Not only will we contribute to funding via the IPCEIs, as was mentioned previously, but the whole ecosystem, all of the member states that have signed up to participate, will be based around some mega fabs, if I can use that jargon. You see some of them in the USA, but we want to have perhaps 3 or 4 in Europe as well, these mega factories, so that we can flesh out the ecosystem and make sure that we have all the links in the chain. The third main point I want to mention about the CHIPS Act, and as Margarette said, this very much is in line with the treaty, is involved in with the strategic application of semiconductors. And this is something that we need to look at very closely. We also need to monitor the reactions of the markets. We have seen this in previous crises, and now we know better what to do. We know that we need to anticipate crises which are on the horizon. We need to react. We must have export lines for priority products. We need to adapt our internal markets, and the Commissioner will talk to us about this new geopolitical development. And in Europe, we need to make sure that world supply chains stay open in a time of crisis. Of course, we do want to be open, and we are partners with other actors in the technology domain. We work in partnership. It would be pointless to think that we can do everything by ourselves in Europe. That wouldn't be useful at all. We need to recognise that technology is moving on in the world, that industry is moving on, so we need to have good links with our partners. We need to work with long-established partners, and we need to work together on a level playing field, on an equal footing, to overcome our problems. We will strengthen our international partnerships, balance them out better. The balance of power needs to be straightened out so that everybody can play a part. We want to therefore strengthen global supply chains and make sure that Europe can stay at the forefront, it can stay competitive, create good quality jobs and fulfill the growing global demand. Because as we present to the European Chips Act today, we want you to see it also as an exporter, a net exporter of this technology produced in Europe. Thank you very much. Commissioner Gabriel, over to you.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. And hello, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, could I say that it's a real pleasure to be here to share with Margarette and Thierry our enthusiasm for the CHIPS Act. Thank you for your interest. I think it was clear from what has been said that within the European Union there are 2 particular ambitions. We want to ensure that we have the digital transition by 2030, and we want to be climate neutral by 2050. Outside the Union, we want to work on our autonomy, reduce our dependence, and reinforce a strategic effort. And this is precisely what we're doing. We're meeting these challenges, addressing these challenges internally and externally. And it's not just microconductors, semiconductors that we should be looking at, but we also have to actually have specific concrete investments in that. Now, I'm here to talk about the role of research. Now, of course, we, with the CHIPS Act, are providing the tools, and that is a scientific and technological challenge. We have to pursue our investments in research and development in order to produce smaller, faster chips, highly energy efficient chips. We have an excellent scientific basis. Over the past few years, the European Union has already invested in semiconductors and chips through various programmes, particularly Horizon 2020. There are various projects which allow Europe to benefit from key cutting-edge technologies. For example, for calculations in difficult environments, helping with electric vehicles, for example, and aircraft. Thanks to the science in this area, Europe is known for excellence in identifying nano faults, and that means that we can produce more reliable and more effective ways of preparing 5G. We also have to invest in the Europe of innovation. We have been supporting innovators in Europe, but in recognising the key role of startups and SMEs in this area for semiconductors, we are promoting this further. Reducing costs, reducing the time needed to produce these, reducing the use of electricity, reducing waste during manufacture, making these more effective. These are just a few examples of the portfolio of projects which are funded by the European Union. At the end of the day, if we want a sustainable Europe, no industry can be competitive unless there is major investment in semiconductors. And that is why the Horizon Europe programme will continue to play a decisive role, because of its ability to mobilise long-term investment based on the excellence of our researchers. The second challenge relates to manufacture. There will be other challenges to meet over the next decades for the European Union, but this is a particularly major one. For example, the production of chips should be circular. Chips are very high-cost components. Often their life cycle is longer than that of the products in which they're inserted, and there should be a way of recovering them and reusing them. So scientific projects for research and innovation offer some real prospects for science and industry to do things in this area. Then we also want to have smaller integrated circuits and faster ones, using materials which we have at the moment to the utmost. It is essential, it is vital that we develop new materials for the semiconductor industry, because we're almost running out of the materials we use at the moment. And I was presented by a manifesto by major researchers on a roadmap for 2030 in order to establish an ecosystem in Europe for new materials. This approach and the initiative which we're proposing here shows a clear, determination on the part of the European authorities to move hand in hand with private partners as well. It's also essential that we develop proper partnership with industry, because the CHIPS Act will have a large number of stakeholders, not just for manufacturing the chips, but also for other industries up and downstream from that. And thanks to the new generation of partnership under Horizon Europe, together with industry, we plan to turn the joint undertaking on key digital technologies. We intend to turn that into a CHIPS joint undertaking. And we will be putting out a call for tender for the presentation of new members. The Basic Act allows for this possibility at the moment, and we need to use that potential. And we want to ask all of the member states under the CHIPS Act to be involved in the area of research and innovation, so that together we can meet the challenges of the global race for semiconductors. Perhaps work on this is starting in some countries, but the technology which will allow us to move from 5 to 9 nanometers and less will require research across the whole of Europe, and that's a key point in what we're presenting today. This is the strength of European research. We have excellence everywhere. In Sweden, for example, with the savoir-faire for removing nanoparticles from wastewater, or in Czechia, the possibility to identify chip failure at nano level, which is very useful in many applications. So there will be new benefits which will be based on centres of excellence across the whole of the European Union. And then finally, education. All of this research will be carried out using the talent available to us, the highly qualified talent which we have here. And it requires us to make sure that the educational tools are made available. And this year, the European Year of Youth, I want to reiterate how determined we are to provide our young people with the knowledge and the skills necessary to build Europe for tomorrow. For example, within the university strategy, we have recognised the importance of the higher education institutes to work hand in hand with industry. For example, we have supported educational systems on specialisation in key technologies, including microelectronics. And we are promoting better coordination with the university and industrial environments in order to promote the use of the market in enhancing the cooperation between researchers and industry. And then technology. This strand allows us to identify where there are skills lacking and to train future talents in close cooperation with private institutes, higher education establishments and research institutes. For example, IT Manufacturing Master's School is training manufacturing innovators and managers of the utmost quality. And I think with the structured work which we have launched with the Member States on digital skills and upskilling, this is an element which will become more and more important. So to conclude, the CHIPS Act is a turning point in Europe for the semiconductor industry, but also for the derived industry. It's essential for our dual digital and green transition. It will allow us to remain leaders in research and innovation and should give us the means also to become a leader in terms of the manufacture of semiconductors and chips. Thank you very much.
To your questions about the European Chips Act, I will alternate, like always, between questions from those present physically and those present, connected remotely. I also wish to remind you that after this press conference, there will be a technical briefing where you can ask more and more technical questions about this, this important file. I will start with somebody in the press room. Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, Victoria English with the publication Mednaus. I have two questions. Have you done any modeling to show where the most intensive use of these chips will be between now and 2030? And secondly, this is a lapse on my part because I don't know what the raw materials, the essential raw materials are and where they come from currently.
Thank you very much. Executive Vice President first.
Well, it's, if you look at Europe today, very few businesses would use cutting-edge technology, so they're below 5 nanometers. There's also very, very little production, but there's a lot of research in Europe for that type of chips. So what we are expecting is a migration over the next 10 years, but very often in a combination with larger chips and the really small ones. Because very often, you know, for instance, in a car, you would find many, many different chips, and you would find them of a different kind. And this is why I said in my introduction that We may call it legacy technology, but we will still need that to develop, and we will still indeed need it. So we foresee this kind of migration and a much greater use. As said, we expect over the next 10 years that the demand will indeed double. I will leave the second question to Thierry. I think he's much better placed to answer that.
Well, thank you. Maybe one word. First, for the raw materials, the supply is, of course, diverse globally. That's obvious, with sourcing from Asia, but also from our neighbors. Looking at raw materials, we will be part, of course, of our monitoring mechanism. And this is why we have put this in place, to make sure that we'll be able to fulfill our requirement, and also to anticipate, let's say, potential shortage. For the first question, I think it's important in terms of market forecast to say that, let's say, the below, let's say, around 10 to 7 nanometers. Today the market is pretty small. It's let's say roughly 10%, but we expect as early as 2025 to have a huge increase in this segment, roughly between 35 to 40%, and it will be, of course, also the fast-growing segment. Consumer electronic, automotive, health, telecommunications, 5G and beyond 5G technologies, of course, everything related also to cybersecurity. So that's definitely the areas where we will need these cutting-edge semiconductors. But I think the trend is extremely fast. And that's why we need to be prepared also to this. And by the way, of course, we will see, and we cannot speak now, but we will have, of course, probably a lot of interest from our like-minded partners with what we are doing here in Europe, including with big companies. But we are in discussions, of course, and member states also, but us also with some potential companies willing to invest here, and the objective is to be ready to produce on an industrial basis below 2 nanometers semiconductors as early as end of 25.
Thank you very much. Yes, Commissioner Gabriel.
I would just like to add something about the raw materials. I'd like to draw your attention to the work of the European Research and Technology Institute, because raw materials is indeed a focus of their communication. What we see today is that there are analyses. We know very well what we have in Europe and how to compare this to what is available in Asia, but we believe that we can set up an ecosystem where we have a synergy between research, industry, and the suppliers of the raw materials. So I think that that's one thing to bear in mind. The second thing I'd like to say is that in the 2030 manifesto, I believe one of our first priorities, as was highlighted yesterday by the participants, is that we concentrate on the development of new materials. We know today that silicium is currently the most frequently used and the cheapest material, but over time we believe that it will be exhausted, it will reach its limits. So it's now time to invest to see how we can replace silicium and how we can try to do this in a short time frame. It's not easy. Thank you.
Please introduce yourself. We don't recognize you always behind your masks.
Hello. My name is Matthijs Schiffers from Het Financiële Dagblad. And I have a question regarding this export mechanism that you will introduce in the CHIPS Act, and that's a bit the same as we have seen with the vaccine delivery in the past. I was wondering, with the vaccines, we had a situation that some countries were not sending vaccines this way while we were exporting lots of them. Have a similar situation occurred in the semiconductors market, or is this really a precaution measure? And another question is, how does it work? Is it like a company that wants to have access to European money, for example, to build a factory in Europe, has to sign up to this measure? Or is it also going to into force for companies that are already producing chips in Europe at the moment? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please.
Well, thank you very much. One should indeed be really, really cautious when it comes to export controls. During, I think, what is now called the vaccine crisis, we had export authorization. It was a few hundred thousands of vaccines that was ever involved in that, but it gave a lot of knowledge about what was actually ongoing, and this is one of the reasons why we know that Europe have exported, I think, more than every second vaccine produced in Europe. I think by now 1.7 billion vaccine has been exported out of Europe. So it was a tiny thing that allowed us actually to know what was ongoing to authorize export. Here, we have tried to describe, I think, a very balanced approach with a number of steps. The reason why we're so keen to say that we want to work with international partners so that we can also help each other on a rainy day is indeed that sort of the international cooperation is the first port to call if there is an issue of shortage. If ever one needed to step into an area where some kind of export controls would be needed, it would be in cooperations with member states to assess what was indeed the need to do here. But we do think that it is important to have that perspective so that everyone knows that Europe can stand up for itself in times of extreme crisis. And as said, also in the state aid assessments of aid for first-of-a-kind facilities, it's really important for us to see that there is a true European effect of aid being handed out. Because this is for Europe. This is not just for a few countries. And of course, a very important part of this endeavour is to make sure that Europe has a bigger, also global footprint in the chips market, which is why export control, of course, is a measure of last resort.
Thank you. Commissioner Breton.
Yes, no, just I think what is extremely important is to say that before we consider this, of course, we will first trigger a crisis stage. So this is really a last resort. We do this only if it's necessary. But as Margaret just said, I mean, we don't intend to use it like this. It's just that we demonstrated during the vaccine crisis, and believe me, it helped us and it helped me a lot when I have been able, while discussing with our partners, including like-minded partners, which blocked our own, let's say, production in our own factories outside of Europe, to send back the lipids that we needed or the disposals that we needed, to say that, look, we have this reciprocity instrument, and if we don't reopen the supply chain, we may have to use it. I mean, it helped us to enter into the dialogue that we need between partners. And this is because we were strong. In other words, we had also things to export that we have been able to reopen the dialogue. That's why you need, as I said, to be strong, to be able to exercise the right balance of power and to help each other. It's not only one way. But of course, our objective is definitely to have this ready, so everybody will know that we can use it. But the last point is that in terms of level playing field, what is extremely important is that we will be able also to help these companies, these funders, to fulfill their own commitment regarding our own companies and industries, whatever could happen outside of Europe.
Thank you very much. Let's now give the floor to colleagues connected remotely. First, Gillian.
Hi, thank you. This is Jillian Deutsch with Bloomberg. I wanted to ask about the state aid rules. Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, before this briefing, said the EU is adapting its state aid rules in the CHIPS Act. I'm also hearing that the EU is not changing its state aid rules. I do recognize the EU is staying within the treaties, but this does seem like a notable shift in how the EU gives state aid. I was wondering then, would this qualify as a change to state aid rules? Why or why not? And do you think this will open the door to providing more state aid for other sectors in the future? Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. And I really appreciate it so that it becomes clear for everyone, because we're not bending, we're not adapting the state aid rules. We're using the provision of the treaty that allows to enable economic activity. That is in the treaty. It has been there for decades. And what needs to be done when using that provision is to balance. Is this beneficial for Europe, or is it damaging because it damages competition? And this is why first-of-a-kind is so essential here, because literally when you have a first-of-a-kind facility, you don't have another one that can suffer from aid being given. Of course, it will be a window, so to speak, where first-of-a-kind facilities can be enabled. But what we then have to do, based on the treaty, is to say that aid cannot be more than what is necessary. It needs to be proportionate, which means that, of course, it's not all publicly funded. There needs to be substantial private investment as well. And there needs to be a pan-European effect, because otherwise there is a risk, indeed, that it will disturb competition or trade between member states. These provisions, as said, they have been there for a very long time. They're quite rarely used, and this is indeed because very often the balancing text will come out negative, because very often you would have economic activity in other parts of the Union, where if you just pour state funding down some businesses in some part of the Union, other businesses, they will indeed suffer. And this is why first-of-a-kind facility is one of the things that can trigger that we can do this without changing any rules.
Thank you very much.
And I think what is important here is that, of course, this is a huge investment that we will never do. And this is why the President was vocal on this, because I think it's the first time that we will be able to allow such huge, let's say, public investment, of course, while respecting the treaty, but of course, regarding what we do usually, since we will finance definitely also megafab. So that's an extremely, extremely important move. But of course, we put our condition, and the condition is that the project have to be first of a kind. That's extremely important in Europe. Ensure also Europe's security of supply, and of course also invest into the whole ecosystem everywhere in Europe, and also for all the suppliers. So this is a strategic element, of course, of our CHIP Act, and I think that this is why this is something that we do, let's say, for the first time.
Thank you very much. Next on my list is David Carretta. Let's try to get him connected. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much, David Carretta, Radio Radicale, Italian Radio. Three quick questions. First one, will Intel or any other company be allowed to go government by government asking public aids and then choosing the government that will offer more? Second question, why Europe is not attractive and need a huge amount of public investment, as Commissioner Breton called it, or state aid to have these major actor on chips or semiconductor opening facilities in Europe. Third question, is Taiwan a like-minded country? Because the President didn't mention Taiwan, she mentioned Japan and the US, but Taiwan is a major player in the sector. Thank you.
Thank you. Quite some questions.
Yes, thank you very much. As said, in order to be able to authorize aid for this kind of investment, It has to be necessary for the investment to take place. It needs to be proportionate and appropriate. And then, as said, have this pan-European effect. And this means that you cannot just go from one to the other to try to sort of job up the subsidy, because we cannot just authorize any subsidy where one is higher than the other. We've always been sort of very attentive to the fact that it should not be for one government to try to lure investment to one territory by jobbing up the state aid promises. We have had a lot of those cases previously, not this size, but it is quite common, and I think everyone knows that this is not the approach, that one can use taxpayers' money to have production placed in your territory rather than in another territory. Of course, there is an important exception from that, and that is assisted regions. Because here, when it is an assisted region, I think tomorrow there will be a press conference on the cohesion report, and Europe is indeed a sort of a cohesion mechanism, then we have special rules depending on that exact territory. Second, I do think that Europe is attractive, but this is an industry where there is a lot of upfront investment. It is really, really expensive to establish this kind of factories. And also because what we are asking here is for a lot of those to be, well, not that there will be many, but to have sort of the open fab business model, which means that you can be a business designing your chip and then go to the fab and have them indeed printed. So it is also quite an ask, and it's in an industry where the upfront investment is enormous and the barriers to entry, they are large. And this is why it's important for European businesses working here, because as Thierry said, this is not just a fab sort of landing all of a sudden. This is an ecosystem being created with many, many more businesses. If you look at the ASML ecosystem in the Netherlands, you'd see that they work with hundreds of different businesses also outside of the Netherlands. So also in the production of equipment to the fabs, you'd see that you have the same mechanism taking place. I know that some of the discussions taking place, they also include TSMC of Taiwan, and now let's see if those projects, they materialize as well. Europe is open for business also for TSMC.
Commissioner.
Well, just a few remarks, because of course everything has been said, but first we don't comment any potential companies. They're vocal themselves, but of course these are European projects, and that's extremely important. And we will, of course, from our side, support a European project. And the second thing is that this, of course, it will be some public money, taxpayer money. So we have to be very careful how to use it. It's not, again, to do what companies are doing. Europe is extremely attractive today. We have a lot of semiconductors companies in Europe. And by the way, they do their job. They increase their production line because the market is here. But it's not ourselves to have to do this. On the other hand, for this cutting-edge fab, mega fab, every region of the world today is starting to help from their side this investment, as long again as they are cutting edge, that they will allow us to have the security of supply and to be able to provide everything that we need all over Europe. So that's really one thing I wanted to tell. But Europe is extremely attractive, yes. In order to attract, you need to have a market. We have a market. You need to have skills. You need to have energy. You need to have competencies. You need to have R&D. This is everything that we have. But for this cutting edge, that's really something that we want to address through this CHIP Act. And of course, Taiwan is an extremely important region of the world where we know that today probably, Roberto, probably 50% of what we use is produced over there. So, of course, there's a lot of expertise, and we are welcoming everyone, of course, in Europe. We are open, of course, including for these companies like the one that the Executive Vice President mentioned.
Gabriel. Je voudrais réagir sur la deuxième question sur...
I'd like to react to the second question on the attractiveness. There are 4 elements which we're putting forward today to make Europe attractive. Of course, you need predictability. That's precisely what we're doing today. This is a strategic target. Priority 1, we have short and long-term objectives. And then we also have to ensure that we have links with the whole value chain, and we have to have a real ecosystem approach involving industry and research. We also have to have flexibility in order to attract investment. The new generation of public-private partnership under Horizon Europe provides this flexibility. And it's also the first time that we are funding so directly startups through the European Innovation Council. We have to support these. And then the attractiveness is also internal. In 2018, there were 450,000 employees. We're going to need talent. We have to have education, research, industry working together to address this challenge and to make Europe attractive, not just for inward investment, but also for our own talent and making it attractive for them.
Oui, bonjour.
Yes, thank you. I'm quite intrigued because Commissioner Breton was talking about mega fabs, the European champions in this domain. But maybe European champion in the European Commission means something different to what I think it means. I don't understand why the European Union has such trouble getting a foothold over its other competitors. You've mentioned other countries, other continents, including China. We are talking about rare earths here, and the rare earth policy of the European Commission has been on the shelf for a long time, for decades. It's been put to one side. But the issue of rare earths is something that China is looking into. It keeps speculating on it. It is active in this domain, whereas the EU is not. So we need to see, as Commissioner Gabriel has said, we need to look at how new materials could be used, because at the moment the dependency is on rare earths. To give the words of Commissioner Tajani, these are not going to last beyond the next few decades. You were speaking about defence, Commissioner, and I wonder how you are going to incorporate this in a domain that doesn't share very much.
I think it is. It has been really interesting to prepare for this. And in my preparation for this press meeting, I was looking at what had the Commission done previously. And the 23rd of May, 2013, there was another press conference, in this room, where then Commissioner Kroes announced European chips strategy. We were going to reach 20% of the global market, massive investment, production to be established. So the question is, why didn't it happen then? And why do we think that it will happen now? And one of the reasons why I'm a strong believer in this proposal that we have tabled and the approach that we have is that we see that things are already happening on ground. That European industry is picking up, taking initiative, but also asking societies, taxpayers, to help take just part of the risk because they're going to do something unprecedented. They're going to not only put their research funding and their capabilities into cutting-edge innovation in everything concerning semiconductors, including how they are produced and what they are produced from. They are also engaging with companies from other states in order to establish real giant open fabs here in Europe. So this is ongoing, and what we can offer is, of course, to make this a European endeavor. So it's not just for one member state or another member state or a third member state. Because when you look then you find that chips are essential for every member state. And the strengths that we have, they are in smaller member states and in bigger member states, and we need to come together. Until we get to a situation where chips can be produced from other things than rare earths, of course, it's really important to have the raw material strategy and the endeavour that we have for this in this Commission. And Thierry just participated in a full-day council meeting exactly on this area, how to make sure that we have access to the raw materials needed. But I admire European industry who engage in full, and we've seen the first results of the first important project of common European interest. We've seen how new chips, developed chips, cutting-edge chips are being produced by Europeans and produced here in Europe. And I think that should be acknowledged, because this is actually what makes it happen and what can change the European footprint in the global value chain of semiconductors.
Si vous le permettez, ça sera en ce qui me concerne ma dernière réponse, parce que.
Yes, let me just come in on that as well, because I have to leave shortly. I'm going to accompany the President on her trip to Africa. I'd just like to reply to those last few questions before I leave.
Champion.
When you use the word champion, well, I'm always a little bit mistrustful of that word. You talk about football champions, skiing champions. I don't really like that word for companies. But we do try to make sure that companies can thrive, flourish, they can attract customers, they can grow, that they have a good relationship between each other, and they produce well. What we do have, though, is we have some leading companies. We have a few leaders, I prefer that term, in the European market. Everybody knows ASML, which is a major leader on the global market, exporting extremely sophisticated materials. We have many chip producers in really specialist areas, and they are performing extremely well. Semtech is also a major leader, and we have companies which are very active, very strong in the market with classical technologies, classical chips for cars, for processors, microprocessors, one-way processors, and so on and so forth. So this is both a new technology. We're talking about the cutting-edge technologies, the nanometers, which require new investment, require reinvention, and this is what we want to bring into the European territory so that they can benefit from the ecosystem that already exists. And I believe in the leaders who are going to make use of this technology and of these companies. They're going to be able to integrate their applications into these factories which already exist, and they can come up with new applications, including in the defence domain. Defence is interesting because it means we can have a pilot line for this package, bringing together people who are interested in defence and in space. We can have a mechanism to set up a specific packaging which is even more robust for the defence domain, which has a lot of security applications. And I believe that we can do this directly on European soil. And this is very important. In terms of rare earths now, indeed, we have a good overview of what we're going to be doing in the area of raw materials, as Margarette just reminded us. We're working with all of our suppliers, Canada, Serbia, Ukraine as well. There are a number of countries in Africa that we work with and that we want to boost our bilateral relationships with. We also have some perspectives for mines within Europe. We've already identified sites, but we need to make sure that we carry out these actions with full respect for biodiversity, for the environment, making sure that we respect the communities around these areas and also use new technologies for extraction, which are much more respectful of the environment. We're talking about France, Germany, Poland, for lithium, all of these sites. And we're also looking at the circular economy aspect. How can we best reuse all of these components? So this is part of our plan, and Maria has been working on this a great deal together with myself. We're working on this in order to reduce our dependency on these materials. But here as well, we have challenges, we have strengths and weaknesses. If we want to export, then we know that we need to work very closely and intelligently together with others. We might have dependencies in some areas, but we need to have partnerships, including with countries with whom we might only trade one component or another. We might exchange components because we export it and we need to import something else. But we're always going to make sure that we respect the rules of international trade, because that's very important for us. That's more or less what I wanted to say, and I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave you now. Thank you. Commissioner Breton sadly has to leave us now because he has to leave for Africa, but the Executive Vice President will still take a couple more questions, 2 or 3 more. There are many requests for questions, but we are just able to take 2 or 3 more. Our last questions now then, please. In the press room, over to you.
Natalie McNeilis from MLEX. I had a question. We just saw a relevant event happen today, which is that the NVIDIA ARM deal collapsed. And I was just wondering, what's the link between, they said it was because of an unprecedented regulatory scrutiny. And I guess that from what we saw, the EU was part of that scrutiny. How does that fit into the EU's chip strategy? Does a deal in this sector raise special alarm bells for you? And is it part of that strategy? Thank you.
Obviously, businesses take their own decisions, both if they want to merge with other businesses and otherwise if they decide that they will not want to take take that merger further. And it's, of course, so that when any merger is notified to us, we will do an assessment of how it will affect competition in that market. But that is an assessment based on the fact of the case, the market investigation. That is not based on the political strategies of the European Union. The merger cases that we do, the market investigations, all of that will have to stand up in court, both with our procedures and on substance. And I want to make it absolutely clear. So the reasons as to why they have decided to abandon the deal, whatever they are, they have nothing to do with the strategy that we are presenting today.
Thank you very much. We will now give the floor to Lawrence, connected remotely.
Hi, thanks for giving me the chance to ask a question. I wanted to continue on the element of the mega fabs investment. And specifically, I was wondering if, as part of the European Chips Act, billions of public support will go to these mega fab projects run by foreign companies like Intel or TSMC. I wanted to ask, is part of the strategy here that there is a guarantee of success? For instance, in the case of Intel, this is an unproven business model. It's a new service that they're trying to set up. And so what happens if such a mega fab fails to deliver on cutting-edge chips? Do Europeans get their taxpayers' money back? And then secondly, I wanted to ask, these mega fab production facilities, does it come with any conditionality that the chips produced in Europe would also be prioritized for the European market in the case of dire shortages or crisis situations? And if it doesn't, why not? And if it does, how does that compare to other regions? For instance, how Japan handles its production, etc. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lawrence.
Unfortunately, I cannot comment on the specifics of the projects that are being talked about in Europe because we have no pre-notification or notification, for that matter, of the support that a member state would want to give. What I have understood so far is that they are indeed connected projects. So it's not standalone, a foreign chip producer coming here and then just establishing a fab. It will be in connection with other European companies so that it is well anchored. And what we will have to do in assessing potential state aid for that establishment to be built is indeed the business plan of the entity. So we get quite an in-depth assessment of how will this actually run. When it comes to priority making, as said earlier on, it's really important for us that this is not seen as a strategy for Europe to be self-dependent, only to produce chips for ourselves. I've been told that the upfront investment to do that would be sort of in the area between 240 and 320 billion euros. And even if you had that kind of money, where to find the capacity actually to build it? The point is that Europe should have a much stronger foothold in the global value chain and in the global supply chain. And first thing first, if there is a crisis, we would want to turn to international partners. This is why we work with the US within the framework of the Trade and Technology Council, first and foremost to understand why does this shortage occur, so that we can prevent it from happening again, because prevention is always better than trying to cure. And then international partnership, if it happened anyway, that would be our first port to call in order to find a cure. And only restrictions on chips produced in Europe to be also delivered to European customers would only set in as a last resort after in-depth consultation also with member states.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Gabriel.
Je voudrais tout simplement réitérer ce message. I would just like to repeat the message. There's not a coincidence that in the CHIPS Act we make a distinction between integrated production facilities and the open. We can work in the open, and we can also work in our own market. So the strength is in the system. So initially it's our own approach, but then if there are any interruptions, if there are any breaks in the system, we pass on the message about what's happening in the member states, and it's in close cooperation with all of the member states that it's possible to react as rapidly as possible. Well, thank you. Yes, the final question is also from someone connected remotely. Pascal, please.
Hello. Do you hear me?
We can hear you, we can see you. All good.
Okay, great. So I have two questions. The first one is on export control mechanism. I think Mr. Breton mentioned that it worked pretty well in the case of vaccines, but would it be the same in case of semiconductors? Can we say that the balance of power is as good as it is for vaccines? And do you think it will be effective in the future? And then my second question is on budget. You mentioned some figures. I would be happy if you could repeat it, Ms. Vestager. In the communication, we are talking about 43 billion euros. Is it enough when it is compared to other regions of the world? Because indeed, the United States is putting $52 billion on the table, but I read in the communication that China is putting 150 billion by 2025, and that South Korea is even putting 450 billion euros on the table. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would be careful to compare with what happened during the vaccine crisis, because what we established during the vaccine crisis was an export authorization, because one company wanted to export vaccines out of Europe while not fulfilling its contract within Europe. And here we found that there was absolutely justification to say that, well, then we need to see that what you export, because we don't want you to export until you have fulfilled your contractual obligations here in Europe. So it was a rather special situation that we had during the vaccine crisis. Second, I think it's important to see sort of this path that we would potentially be able to go. Because first, it's important to be able to prevent shortages. because as everyone can see right now, once they're here, they have real consequences on ground. People are being laid off, cars cannot be produced, and it's not something that is easily curable. It has already been going on for some time. It will still be ongoing for some time. So absolutely best to prevent it from happening, which is why all over the planet more production capacity is being established. Second, if shortages happens anyway, well, then to have such strong international interdependencies that we know that we can for real rely on one another also on such a rainy day. And only if all of that fails, then to put in place not only export controls, but also this crisis mechanism so that we know what is ongoing and know that European customers can get the chips that they need for their production. I think the only numbers that I mentioned was the numbers of the first IPCI on semiconductors, where you have a public investment of 2.1 billion that has unlocked almost 2 billion of euros of public money that has helped spur 6.5 billion of private sector funding. This is things that we know. I think Maria can say more about the research funding. And then, of course, there's been some reprioritization internally in the Commission to say, well, this is really important. So we will suggest that funding is taken from some projects into this. Then, of course, there will be other public funding, other private funding remains to be seen.
And indeed, we will also have a technical briefing where you can go in details on the figures. But Commissioner Gabriel first, perhaps.
Just very quickly to come in on the topic of research and the share that's going to be funded by the Horizon Europe programme. You will know that we have put aside 3.3 billion from the European funds. 1.65 will come from Horizon and the other half from Digital Europe. For the moment, we know that the joint undertaking will also come from, will also provide funding, InvestEU, and another 300 million from another source. So this is additional to the proposal we've made to transfer 400 million from Horizon Europe to the Digital Europe programme. But let me remind you that to compensate for that transfer, the Commission has suggested that we build up this reserve of 400 million again up to 2027 for Horizon Europe, because this is going to be used for the CHIPS programme, but this hasn't been taken up in previous research programmes. And let me remind you as well of our announcement at the Trilogue with all the details of these funds.
Thank you very much to Commissioner Gabriel and to Commissioner Breton, who already left us. Thank you for your engaging questions. And stay tuned for the technical briefing, which is starting in a minute. And this will allow you the possibility to go more in detail about all of this. Thank you.